let's move on to our speaker. So, I came across Vernon at Test Bash 2015. Now, this isn't Vernon at Test Bash 2015, but two people stole the show for me at Test Bash? I'm Sean Connery. Test Bash 2015. Vernon was one of them, and the other one was Richard Bradshaw, who on Twitter is a friendly tester. So the reason Vernon came across so well was his presence on the stage, the way he spoke, the way he engaged with the crowd. So the fact that we've got him here tonight is brilliant. But there's one question I've got for Vernon, and it's basically, what on earth is that lad doing to you for you to have that face? Maybe you can answer that when you come up.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah? Okay. So there is this really important video from YouTube. It's 38 seconds long, and as you'll notice, it's Vern. And we don't have volume. Do you want to tell us what you're saying, Vernon? Basically, he's been to Test Bash, New York, and it's the morning after. You look pretty sober for the morning after, to be fair. That's pretty cool. And basically what he's saying is he's re-emphasising Emma's message, which is he's been to New York Test Bash. He's met some people that he knew. He's met some new ways, some new testing techniques. They've spoken some really interesting testing stuff. But more importantly, he's met new people. And I think that epitomises, again, along with Emma's bio, why we're doing this tonight. So on that bombshell, if you could flick over, I'd like to welcome on stage the one, the only. Okay, it's Veron Richards. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Vernon. Thanks for having me up here. Just a quick note about, before I get into the talk, about community stuff. There is an event happening in Brighton in about 5 weeks' time, if you've not heard of it, called Test Bash. There are still 1 or 2 tickets floating around for workshops and the conference. So if you're interested in attending that, it's if you head to the ministryoftesting.com website, you can find out about Test Bash 2016. It is absolutely fantastic. There are more of us guys going to be there. So yeah, I would recommend that. But anyway, onto my talk. So Leigh mentioned the talk I did at Test Bash last year, which was about, well, I called them myths. They're basically, you could paraphrase it to daft things that people think about software testing. So I just thought I would explore 1 or 2 of those things in a little bit more detail to give you my take on why I think they may or may not be true or not. But it's a disclaimer first. And these are just my opinions. I've done no scientific research into any of this. This is just what I've observed while I've been working since everyone's quoting years. I've been testing this is my 14th year, started in 2002. Started testing video games, by the way, PlayStation people, what's up? Yeah, so that's it. But your mileage may vary, so you might disagree with what I'm saying. You might agree violently, but maybe you can let me know after the talk. So the too long didn't read. If you fall asleep, you won't have missed anything if you read this slide. So context is king or queen. This second one is quite an important one to me. Based on the context, you shouldn't necessarily leap to conclusions and start slamming people if they've got a different idea to you about software testing, because their experience may vary. And what they believe might actually be quite relevant. It might be congruent, or might make sense to them. And in the same way that we're all a little bit tetchy when people say daft things about software testing, we get our backs up a little bit. Basically, we might be guilty of over-egging ourselves and making ourselves think that we're a little bit more important than we actually are. So don't do that, please, if you can. Okay, so this is the first myth. Does this sound familiar to anybody? Testing is just clicking a few buttons, right? People have either literally heard something like this, like anyone can do testing, it's just clicking a few buttons, or people act like it's true. It's like, I'm not picking on you guys, but when I tested video games, it was essentially, they would just lasso any poor sap walking past the building and drag them in and let them do some software testing, right? Because that's how easy they thought it was, okay? Now, first thing you've got to do is ask yourself, why does anybody think this? Okay, so there might be a few explanations. So, it might actually be true in their situation. It might actually just boil down to, I've just got to sit here and press this button. Okay, I'm going to press that button. I'm going to press this button. Awesome. Then I'll come back the next day Same thing, I'll press that button. Maybe you might press a slightly different button in a slightly different location, but that's all it might boil down to for these guys, okay? So if that's what they believe, because that's what their experience is telling them, you know, c'est la vie, you can't really blame them for that. The other thing is, so this is a very fancy looking iceberg. Now, I've put that up because the only thing that they can see is that. So if all they see us doing is just, for want of a better phrase, playing around with the application and the test, just fooling around, pressing some things, clicking on some things, filling in forms and submitting the button, and that's all they see, you can't really blame them for thinking that's all there is to it, because that's the only thing that's visible for them, particularly if you work in an organisation where collaboration is not really practiced very much. Everyone's very siloed, okay? And that leads on to this, which is, so this is, so where's Rich? So my friend Rich is here. This is a test plan, I work with Rich at the moment. This is a test plan from where we work. One of our colleagues was being badgered for a test plan, so she created this. Basically, we suck at explaining what we do. Like, we are really bad at it. We're awful. Whether it's a verbal report or a written report, where it's, you know, you might be in your stand-up and I've done this. So, Van, what can you give your stand-up? And it's like, yesterday, tested some stuff. And today, I'm going to test some stuff. And I have no blockers. Yeah, that's it. And that is it. Or you might say, well, I'm just gonna dick around on some browsers and stuff. Right? We're not very good at explaining what we do and how we add value. So again, if people think it's just clicking and dicking around and playing around aimlessly, you can't really blame them for that. So that's why they might think that. The other thing is, so that's why they might think that. Now, with a lot of these things, there might be a little sliver of truth. Not loads, but there might be a little bit. So, you look like a scary dude. So if I was gonna challenge you to a fight, right? And I said, I'm gonna challenge you to a fight. I'm gonna fight you with this, and I'm gonna give you a baseball bat, right? Would you be like, I'm feeling okay about that?
Reasonable.
So what if everything was the same in that scenario, except you swap out me and replace him with this dude? He's still only got this, and you've got a baseball bat. Would you feel more or less confident about that scrap?
A little less, I'd say.
A little bit less. This dude?
Less.
Less, right? So the reason it might be right is because there might be more or less risk. Like, depending on what everyone else is doing before the software gets to you, the only thing left to do might be just sit there and just, it looks all right, okay, let's get it into production, it's all good. So it might be true, it depends. Again, you see more of this in more collaborative, agile kind of places that are doing lean and continuous, whatever it is this week. Software development's kind of got a rapid pace, right? So it might be true, because then that might be the only thing left to do. Clicky. So you could put me at the end of this team, and the only thing left to do would be to just bring it home, because the Jamaica sprint team are freaking awesome. By the time you get to the final leg, all I've got to do, I could like moonwalk the last 100 meters, and I'd probably still win, because they've done all the hard work already. So if they've done all the unit testing and they've done all the performance testing and they've brought somebody in and done some usability testing, I'm just going to be sat there going, okay, there's not much left for me to do now because we've done it all. So that's why they might be right. But why I think they're wrong is because there's so much more to testing than we make visible most of the time, even in teams that are quite collaborative. And because we're so bad at it, explaining what it is we do, and because we're not so great at making it visible, they just think it's clicking the buttons. They don't see the part where you think to yourself, okay, let me figure out what it is I actually want to do with this thing. Let me think about where the risk might be. Let me go off and talk to the product owners and see what it is that they actually want this thing to do, and understand what problem we're trying to solve by building the software in the first place, and then focus all my testing around answering those risks or not. Which is all about telling, this is Hans Christian Andersen, I love this guy, this is Danny Kaye, I'm showing my vintage a little bit right now. But it's a good movie, and it's all about telling the testing story. And the testing story is in 3 different parts. First, you've got to tell the story of the product. So it either works or it doesn't. Or it sort of works or it sort of doesn't. And the next part is where you talk about your testing, which is what did you actually do to even arrive at that conclusion? So you weren't just clicking a few buttons. You kind of said, well, actually, what I did was I looked at the analytics and it said everyone uses Chrome that interacts with our software. So I tested Chrome first. And then I went to Firefox, and I didn't bother with the BlackBerry 8900 because no one uses that anymore, right? And then the final part of that testing story is why that testing was any good. So again, you might refer back to your analytics and say, well, the reason I didn't bother testing on Internet Explorer is because. Or the reason that I have done performance testing is because it's Black Friday next week. And if we don't do that, we're screwed. So if you do all those things, then people might change their opinion about whether this is just clicking and messing around and fooling around. The other thing, this slide is not the best, but up here we're talking about capability, okay? So usually, my experience is predominantly around functionality and capability of the software. That's just one dimension of quality. If quality is value to some person, that kind of means that different people will have will rate things differently. So, not to bring it back to sport, but we're in Liverpool, and some people might think that the certain blue team is better than red team, and you could take a player out of each of those ones and ask different people, do you think this player is quality? And depending on their allegiance, they'll say rubbish, or they'll say awesome. And this is the kind of thing I'm thinking about, but there are more dimensions to that. There are loads. There's reliability. Well, I was going to go through all of these, but there's loads of them. There's usability, there's compatibility, there's security, there's performance. But if we only focus on that, which is the clicking stuff in the application of the test, predominantly in my experience been website. I've done a lot of website testing and games testing. If that's all I focus on, there's all this other stuff that I could have the option of going after. I could go after performance, I could go after supportability and all those other things. So that in totality is why I think that they're wrong and that testing is not just clicking a few buttons. So here's the next one. Does this feel familiar again? Okay. So counting things, we all love counting things, right? So why do people think this? So when I first started testing, first I started testing video games, like I was saying, hey PlayStation dudes. But we didn't really write very many actual test cases in that environment. It was only after I left that domain I went and worked, I think my next job after that was Sky. And we just had oodles and oodles of test cases. Go here, click this thing, do that, make that observation, pass, fail. And the notion was the more of those that you had, the better, because there was an assumption that if you think about it hard enough ahead of time, you can figure out what it is you want to test. So more is always better. If you're a lead or a manager or someone like that, and you're trying to, got Duncan over there, Duncan and I on the same team, Lee's our boss, he wants to know who is more awesome at this job. So he'll start saying, well, I'm sorry, I got a bias towards me being awesome. Apologise. Vernon has found a gajillion bugs. Duncan's only found 2. How lame is that? Rubbish. Because it's very easy to count, right? Or you might want to compare teams. So you might have a lot of different teams that you're responsible for. And so you might say to yourself, well, that team, they executed 2 gajillion tests while you guys only did half a gajillion. That's terrible. You guys are awful. And on some weird level, that might make sense, but I'll get into that a little bit later. Another thing that people might need to do, they might need to communicate or convey some notion of how much testing has happened, because they might need to communicate that up the food chain or maybe down the food chain, or maybe just make sure that the testing work is going to get finished by a particular time. So we need to know how much has been done and how much we've got left. There may only be a finite amount of testing left to do in a finite amount of time. There might be more testing to do than there is time available. And so they'll use the counting of things to try and get a grip on this stuff. And again, because it looks like it might work, people carry on doing it. Now, why might they be right? Now, these two, you've got Inspector Clouseau here and Inspector Morse. What I'm trying to say is there are people that are good at testing and there are people who are bad at testing. But how do you tell them apart? There is something going on that, in my example, Duncan might not have been doing that I was doing. But again, it kind of depends on how you frame it. And how you frame it, or how I like to frame it quite often, is with this model. So I've got this from James Back's rapid software testing course that he runs with Michael Bolton and others. Now, this circle here, this kind of relates to your requirements, whether they're written down, user stories, or whatever, okay? This space represents the actual software that you got. Now, if I just write a test, or maybe two, for each line in the requirements document that I've got, I'll be exploring this space, okay? I won't necessarily be exploring this part here, necessarily. And so counting tests, go here, do that, isn't going to help me understand, well, how much of that have I got left? And that gets even more complicated because this circle is actually two circles. There's the thing that they asked for, and there's the thing that they want, that they didn't tell you about. So in case you're struggling, you could think about it. There's a couple of examples. For example, I'm going to try and keep the sexism out of this, but you move into a new place, and I've suffered this recently. You move into a new place and you're there with the other half, and she'll say, that couch, it needs to go over there. And I'm like, sure? She'll be like, yeah, definitely needs to go there. So I'm like, all right, pull the mouse thing over there, and I'll get over there. And the minute I get it over there, she's like, actually, no, I don't want it over there. I want it back where it was again. And the reason that happens is because people may not know what they want until they see it or interact with it, get to play with it. It's not that they're just deliberately trying to yank your chain. They just haven't seen it yet. They need to experiment with it. Another thing is, something might seem so obvious that they don't even think they need to ask for it. So if we end up, you guys have all been to the pub or to the bar. You might walk into the bar and you might say, barman, I'd like a pint of beer. And the barman will bring you a pint of beer. Now, does anyone in here think that if I'm brought a pint of beer, do I have a problem or do I not have a problem? Who says problem? Who says no problem? So the people who said no problem, I didn't even describe who I was. I could have been a 10-year-old in there. What the hell are you bringing me beer for? Have you lost your goddamn mind? What are you doing? I might already be inebriated, shall we say. And you shouldn't be bringing me the goddamn beer. You might have brought me the beer, but it might be the right amount, but spilled out in a tray. And I've just brought the tray and gone, here you go, mate. There's your beer. There's 1,000,001 different ways why you may not be happy with the outcome. I don't drink beer anymore, but I never go into a bar and say, yeah, can I have a pint of lemonade? Make sure you bring the right change. Don't keep me waiting here all week. Make sure the glass is clean. I'm paying in pound sterling, so you better bring back pound sterling. Don't be giving no one there says any of that crap. Just say, can I have some drink, please, mate? Then you get given a drink. But if you see hair floating in the bloody drink, you'd be like, steady. No, I don't want that. Next one. That's what that might be. So you got to kind of be on your toes a little bit. This is about, so bugs and test cases and all that kind of thing, they're very easy to count. I seen this on Twitter the other day, and they're actually circles, they're not spirals. I didn't realize that. If you look closely, you'll notice that I don't like zone out on me, but trust me, they're circles, not spirals. And that reminded me about this, which is because bugs are easy, very easy to count, and test cases are very easy to count. Let's count those. And if we've got more of those, we'll just assume that means something useful. So, in the example I gave you right now, earlier on, you found 2, I found a gajillion. Here's the thing. The team I'm working with are fucking useless at coding anything. So it's like shooting fish in a barrel. I'm just like, yeah, bug, yeah. Whereas Duncan's working with Super Team. Super Team, they don't make any mistakes, right? That's why he's only found 2 bugs. But if I'm only counting bugs, I'm not going to question any of that information. I'm just going to see the number and go, yep, he's useless, fired. And also, it doesn't speak to any of the other work that we alluded to before going on. It just focuses on one very narrow aspect, which is, I don't know if any of you guys have worked with crowdsourced testers like U-Test and things like that. They will pay testers by the number of bugs that they find. That's daft. Because, well, it is, because if the application was really well put together and there aren't any bugs to find, there's no way that you can determine from counting bugs how hard I looked or not. Now, he could have been looking real hard because he has to. Whereas I'm just like, yeah, whatever, fish in the barrel, I'm just finding bugs all over the place, right? And it doesn't get into that. So that's why I think this isn't really true at all, really. And I had to do this last one because recently there was a very cool article about this came out in the last week or so. So automated testing solves all of your problems. All right, okay. So what do people mean by this? So we're back in the goddamn nuclear reactor. And here Homer has replaced himself with an automaton who's going to also sit there pressing buttons in the same way that a human would. Now, some of the testing that we do is about behaving like a user and doing user actions. So automating that might have some value, okay? That might have some value, so fair play. Also, I like this image for reasons I can go into after this talk, but what people often say is, if you automate everything, Vern, you'll be free. This is Andy Dufresne from the Shawshank Redemption, actually crawls through a mile worth of stuff to escape. And people seem to liken testing to this, right? You need to escape the drudgery of your job, Vern. Please, let us automate this stuff, and then you can just go and sit on the beach and chill out. And depending on the nature of the work, might actually be true. Might actually be quite dull and might actually be quite boring. And we've got to go faster, right? It's agile. Everyone's agile now, right? We've got continuous, whatever the hell it is this week, right? We've got to go quick, speed. We've got to go speed. If I've got to sit there and click stuff, and I'm going to do everything by hand, it's going to be really slow. So that might help us speed things up. If we automate everything right, automate all the things for the win. Now, they might be right, because anyone who's worked with, so I've worked with Steve before. Anyone who's worked with me before knows that I fucking hate regression. I hate that crap. Wow. So if you tell me, hey, Van, we're going to automate all your regression, I'm going to go, thank you so much. I don't ever want to do that crap ever again. So they might be right. It might solve. And if that's your only problem, then yeah, it will solve all your problems. But you can't automate everything. This is the most advanced goddamn machine in Hollywood universe, and he can't even smile properly. Look at that crap. What is that? That's not a real smile. And this is the thing, you can't automate software testing. It's not possible. Now I have to refer to my notes because it's not possible for a whole million different reasons. La 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 la. So, the first problem with it is when we talk about automation, we're talking about a very narrow slice of testing, okay? We're talking about the user interaction part. Everything else that's useful is what we do as humans, and that's the bit you can't automate. So when you talk about automation, it's a little bit misleading. But again, if you refer back to the first myth, the reason that people think it's true is because it's just the clicking buttons part, right? So if I can click a button like that as fast as a human, maybe I can get a machine to do it real quick. So rather than automation, and there's an article by James Back and Michael Bolton that was out recently that you should go read if you haven't already, and see what you think. Rather than talk about automation, testing, talk about automation in testing, which is a really cool phrase that a friend of mine called Richard Bradshaw came up with. That's the guy that Lee was talking about earlier. So what that means is, if that sounds a little bit too bleh to you, then it's really talking about, well, rather than looking at automation as Selenium only, or test complete or something, then we think about, well, how can I use the computer? How can I use the machine? How can I use something to make my life easier? So rather than, so at the moment, I'm working on an e-commerce site at the moment. And quite often there are situations where I need a customer in a particular state. So what I do, because I don't have the ability with the tools yet, is I'll go and create a user, I'll go and buy some stuff, I'll go and buy some more stuff, and I'll go and buy even more stuff. And then I can start doing the actual testing work that I want to do. Whereas one of our colleagues, seeing that, was like, hell no, I'm not doing any of that crap. And he just put together this really cool SQL script that goes into the database, finds a customer that already exists with customer data, and then goes to another system, changes the password for that user to password, and then he just logs in with them. And it says, done. And he starts working. Now he's going to be way more productive than me because he's more proficient with a particular tool. But he's not automating a user action. He's using the tools to provide him with data. Another thing you can do is rather than create the test environment, you're relying on your coders to provide you with a test environment, you can just create tools that will just spin you up an environment at the touch of a button, okay? And there are millions and millions of other ways that you can leverage tools in your work to make your work more productive. And that's what this speaks to. You can't automate all of that stuff. Testing is knowledge work like anything else. My wife's a lawyer. Now, you can't automate lawyering. You can't automate being a doctor. You can't. It's all knowledge work. There's a certain level of human empathy that's required. There's a certain measure of curiosity. I watched a talk by a chap from Google who was talking about the fact he was talking about using perceptual difference to help him test, because Google literally have thousands upon thousands upon thousands of automated tests. Automated checks is probably what I like to call them. And he was making a change to the visual side of his application. And what happened was, in order to test that change, he'd put a little bouncing, or prancing I should say, My Little Pony icon into the application, but forgot to take it out. So Google, you make a commit in Google and everything, like all those tests will run. All those tests pass, awesome. They do continuous delivery, so we went straight out to production with a prancing pony that no one noticed, no machine noticed it. Now, if that was you looking at that, the first thing you would probably say is, what the actual hell is that thing going? What's going on there? The machine didn't do that because you didn't tell it to look. You need to tell the machine to look for everything. You need to say, hey machine, if you see a prancing pony there with some like rainbow coloured hair, that's a fail, okay? So that's where I'm coming from when I say automated testing, not possible, okay? That's pretty much it for me.